Hi everyone, I'm Luke. I'm studying for my Masters in Terrorism, Security and Society at King's College London at the moment. And today I want to talk about something that I think we often misunderstand when we talk about genocide. We're very good at talking about the violence itself, the statistics, the timelines, the atrocities, the court rulings, but we're much less comfortable talking about what comes after. What does recovery actually mean 30 years later? When the news cameras leave, when the trials slow down, when a new generation grows up that didn't directly experience the violence, but yet it still lives in its shadow. In my article I looked at two cases, Rwanda after the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, and Bosnia and Herzegovina after the 1992 to 1995 war and the Srebrenica genocide. Both societies experienced extreme violence, both are now roughly 3 decades removed from it, and both have avoided renewed mass violence, but have taken very different paths in trying to rebuild safety, identity and belonging, and I think comparing them helps rethink what recovery actually means. One of the biggest misconceptions is that once violence stops, recovery begins automatically. But peace is not the same thing as reconciliation, and it's definitely not the same thing as healing. A peace agreement can stop armed conflict. A court ruling can assign legal responsibility. Economic growth can improve material conditions, but none of these things automatically rebuild trust between neighbours. None of them guarantee that identity won't become weaponized again. Genocide just doesn't destroy lives. It destroys social fabric, it fractures identity, it creates fear that lingers across generations. So when I talk about recovery, I'm not talking about infrastructure or GDP growth. I'm talking about whether people feel safe, whether justice feels meaningful, whether public identity stops feeling dangerous. And that's where Rwanda and Bosnia take very different approaches. Let's start with Rwanda. After the 1994 genocide, where around 800,000 people were killed in approximately 100 days, the country faced total social collapse. Institutions were shattered, trust between communities was destroyed. The government that took power after the genocide prioritized one thing above all: stability. State authority was consolidated quickly. Armed groups were dismantled, security became non-negotiable, and from a prevention perspective, that makes sense. Without physical safety, nothing else is possible. But Rwanda didn't just focus on security enforcement. It also tried to address what leaders saw as a root cause of the genocide: the politicization of ethnic identity. Before 1994, ethnic categories, Hutu and Tutsi, had been politically mobilized and weaponized. So, the post-genocide government moved towards promoting a unified national identity, and the message became, "We are Rwandan." Public political mobilization along ethnic lines was heavily restricted. Ethnic identification was discouraged in official discourse. The goal was preventive: reduce the salience of divisions that had once been catastrophic. Justice was also handled in a distinctive way. In addition to the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, Rwanda implemented the Gakaka court system, community-based courts that processed around 1.9 million cases. Survivors and perpetrators often faced each other in local proceedings. Confession and testimony were central. But that approach had trade-offs. It was faster and more locally embedded than conventional courts, but it also placed emotional burdens on survivors and didn't always meet international standards of due process. Still, it meant justice was visible and communal, not distant and abstract. Memory in Rwanda is also structured and centralized. There are annual national commemorations every April. Memorials are maintained across the country, and remembrance is framed as a civic responsibility. Now, it's important to say, Rwanda today is widely seen as stable and secure. Economic growth has been significant. Women have high representation in parliament, and infrastructure has expanded. But debates remain. Critics argue political dissent is constrained, and that reconciliation narratives are shaped largely from above. Supporters argue that strong central direction has been necessary to prevent renewed violence. So, Rwanda's model could be summarized like this: prioritize stability, promote national unity, and reduce ethnic political identity to prevent recurrence. Now, let's look at Bosnia and Herzegovina. The war from 1992 to 1995 ended with a Dayton peace agreement, but instead of reducing ethnic identity in politics, the agreement formalized it. The country was structured into entities with power-sharing mechanisms among Bosniaks, Croats and Serbs. Leadership positions rotate. Representation is explicitly tied to a group identity. The logic here was different from Rwanda's. Instead of saying, we need to downplay ethnic difference, Bosnia's system says, we acknowledge these groups exist and we design institutions so none can dominate the others. In terms of security, the agreement worked. Large-scale violence has not resumed. Justice largely occurred through international and national courts. The Srebrenica massacre was legally recognized as a genocide. High-level perpetrators were prosecuted, but acknowledgement at the community level is uneven. Narratives differ across regions. Memory is presented, but often fragmented. In some places, schools operate separately for different communities, sometimes even in the same building. Historical narratives can vary depending on curriculum. So unlike Rwanda's centralized unified memory politics, Bosnia's memory landscape is plural and contested. At the same time, everyday life can be more integrated than political rhetoric suggests. In urban areas, people work together, study together, and socialize together. And among younger generations especially, frustration often focuses less on ethnic division and more on economic stagnation and political paralysis. But Bosnia's system also produces gridlock. Decision-making can be slow and bureaucratically complex. Many people emigrate, seeking opportunity elsewhere. So Bosnia's model can be summarized like this: institutionalize ethnic pluralism, balance power between groups, and prevent domination through structure. What I find most interesting is that both countries are responding to the same underlying fear. How do we make sure this never happens again? Rwanda's answer is unity, Bosnia's answer is structured pluralism. One reduces the public role of ethnic identity, the other embeds ethnic identity into political design. Both approaches are attempts at prevention, both have trade-offs. Neither eliminates trauma, and neither creates a perfect harmony. But both have avoided renewed mass violence for 3 decades, and that's significant. Another important layer is generational. Many people under 30 in both Rwanda and Bosnia did not directly experience the genocide or the war, but yet they inherit its memory. Trauma just doesn't disappear when violence ends. It shapes family dynamics, it shapes silence, it shapes how history is told, or not told. So recovery isn't just institutional, it's psychological and intergenerational. The real test of recovery isn't whether tension disappears, it's whether a society becomes stable enough that ordinary life can continue, with disagreement, with political competition, but without mass violence. 30 years is long enough for institutions to solidify and for children born after violence to become adults. It's not long enough to erase collective trauma. Recovery after genocide is uneven, contested, and deeply human. It's not a checklist you complete, it's a continuous process of managing fear, identity, and memory. If genocide destroys the basic sense of safety and belonging, then recovery is about rebuilding just enough trust and structure that people can imagine a future again. Not a perfect future, not a tension-free society, but a future where violence is no longer the default fear. And maybe that's the most realistic definition of recovery we have. Thank you for listening.